Hello, this is Dr. Schemberger, and I'm briefly going to share with you how really education news, because it has not been fully uncovered, how we are trying to fill those gaps, how I, as an educator, as well as I, as a journalism historian who happens to love education news, how I'm trying to help contribute to the scholarship in the historical development of education news. So I just wanted to share with you briefly a project that I've worked on and had published in, I believe it was last summer's issue of Journalism History, which is a peer-reviewed journal. So one day I am trying to find something in education news history to examine, to study, so that way I could develop into a paper to present at a conference and then hopefully have it published in a journal. And after going through one website to another, going from one article to another, I finally happened upon this gem. It is known as, it's a magazine that was published from 1964, from 1965 to 1969. And it was known as the Southern Education Report. It was a publication of a service at that time known as Southern Education Reporting Service. And Southern Education Reporting Service began from a grant of the Ford Foundation, in which once the Brown versus Board of Education ruling came down in 1954 that ruled desegregation needed to occur, so segregation was illegal, then what the Ford Foundation wanted to do, it did a number of things, but one of the things it wanted to do was to kind of trace to see what was going to happen in the schools. How were various policymakers going to go about making sure that desegregation efforts occurred? So a reporting service focusing on education and primarily in the South, since obviously we had a lot of segregation issues going on at that time. So it focused on that area. This Southern Education Reporting Service published three various publications throughout its existence. The first one was Southern School News, and it was published just like a newspaper. Then that ceased to operate, and then the Southern Education Report became about, which is what I have studied quite a bit. And then after its 4-year tenure, then the Race Relations Reporter became more of the product, where they were really trying to now focus more on some of the data that they discovered throughout their journeys in the Southern Education Report. So really what the Southern Education Report magazine did, it was published just about every month except a couple of months during the summer. And to me, it was really a rich way of seeing education news, how it could be covered as this beat. So some of the observations, I did that content analysis. Remember in the previous video, I talked about how content analysis was the primary methodology used by researchers to really determine what the weight of education news was in the news coverage. So I did a content analysis. Throughout its 4-year, and I was able to obtain all 4 years of this journal, or excuse me, of this magazine. So I looked at 244 of the main articles that were published. What I mean by main articles is that it was the main article. There wasn't a sidebar or any type of small news item. It was basically the main story. And I found that much of the coverage was about poverty, culturally disadvantaged students, as well as culturally deprived students throughout the South. 38 stories also were about desegregation and related topics. And it continued to break down into even smaller bits as to some of the main issues that were reported. So it basically, like I said, existed for 4 years up until 1969. And it was really a rich issue or a rich magazine that kind of set the standard for what we need to be doing in education news reporting, even on the mainstream level. So that was one of the conclusions that I made about this particular publication. And really it brought up to this question here, is education reporting a priority? And to really answer that, we do have to look at the history. But as you have seen already, it's broken, right? We have a lot of gaps to fill. So while I have always argued, and you heard me in the first video, to say that education is the primary news beat that we should be focused on entirely in news organizations, but yet is education reporting really a priority? Is it regarded as a priority? And still today, does the public regard it as a priority? So, as you go through your own historical journey and adventure into trying to find what was covered in the news pages of the early into the mid and even into the late 20th century, really think about that question and how you, as a news consumer, wish to really examine the topic of education. The next 2 or 3 slides is going to be my some of the sources that I use, not just in this particular video regarding the Southern Education Report, but also if you want to look at one of the content analysis studies that some of the earlier researchers did. So what I will do is just kind of go through, and if you're interested, you can just pause the screen and look at a particular article's cited opportunity there. And for the next one, again, you can just pause if you need to look at these in detail. And then here's the final one. But all of these sources were used to put together this instructional material for you, as well as has been used in my research. Thank you for your attention.